Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Second Coming. I'm your host, Jason Keeton, and I'm here with Brother T. How's it going today, Brother T?
It's going very well, my friend. So it's cooling off a little bit, right? It's wow, here we are, right at the end of November, Thanksgiving. It's pretty exciting. Thanksgiving is here in just a few days, and families are getting together, and people are making plans, and it's that time of year again. Here we are.
So much to be grateful for. So much to be happy and grateful for. So, yes. So, Brother T, I want, if you don't mind, I want to just tell a great story that kind of pertains to some of the things that you talk about. And it comes from my daughter and soon-to-be granddaughter that's only 3 years old. And she was sitting in the car the other day, the 3-year-old, and she's a young 3, you know, she just turned 3. And her vocabulary isn't that big. And she turned to us and she said, you know, I haven't always been small. And we're like, what do you mean? She goes, well, I was big before, and I don't know how I got small, but I remember that I got to pick out my parents, Mason and Sydney, which was our biological parents. And she went on to tell that she worked at a clinic in her past life, and very detailed street names, coffee shop names, and using just words like clinic, coffee shop, a specific town. It was very interesting. Details of she didn't recall when she passed, but she said her best friend passed when her best friend was 16 years old, and they were both 16 at that time. And it was really interesting to me, though, when she said, I got to choose my parents. And it was interesting because you've mentioned the journey of the soul and the journey of the spirit. And I just found that amazing. And I'm going to turn it over to you and let you expound on that amazing comment.
Okay. Well, let's bring some assistance into the conversation with us. Let's close our eyes for a moment, unless you're driving, and let's take a good deep breath and turn within. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Mother, Father, God, for joining us in this conversation this morning. Thank you, guides, masters, teachers, family, loved ones, friends of the truth. We are so blessed to be in the company of so much wisdom. And we ask only to be informed by the highest consciousness available to us, and to be guided today so that we are the expression of love in the best and highest way for everyone who gets to participate in our conversation today. It will be so. And so it is. So, wow, that's a pretty amazing story, right? So this little girl, I think I heard you say she's about 3 years old. Is that right?
Right.
Right. So she's just learning to speak. And so she's saying words suddenly that she's never been taught or hasn't used before. And she's talking about evidently a past life experience. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely a past life. But like I said, the amazing part is how she said, I got to choose my parents.
Right. But I thought we only had one shot. And then if you screw it up, then you're going to go to hell forever. And that's pretty much over. So how do we reconcile those two things?
I mean, you're saying it as a joke, I know, because in our spiritual world, we know that we go on and we are spirit in this human body, and the confirmation of that statement by this young girl talking about getting to choose Mason and Sydney. She didn't even call them her parents. She just said Mason and Sydney. And even that statement, how many 3-year-olds call their parents something other than mom and dad. So it was really, I thought, powerful affirmation as where we came from, as our seed, as our soul,
Right.
as our higher self.
Well, I guess the point of my question is that you can't really reconcile those two things because one is true and the other one can't be true, right? And I could spend quite a bit of time going back over the history of how, well, I'll use Christianity as an example, not to single it out, but just as an example of how it came into being and how over 2,000 years the teaching was modified and changed and added to, and stuff was deleted. And honestly, what we know now, what we have evidence of, factual evidence in scriptures and writings that have been revealed to us and discovered, still being discovered today. What Jesus taught us about and taught his disciples about was reincarnation, that we are a journey of souls and we come into form again and again to experience the growth of the soul. The soul is maturing through the experience of being manifested in form. And the experiences that the default operating system provide are fantastic until they aren't, until they get in the way. And it can override the soul's ability to express completely. So for most people, the soul is just keeping the body activated, keeping the body alive, but really has no voice. It's really kind of operating in the background. It's being ignored. And we talked just recently, I believe it was last week, about how the one thing that the ego can't defend itself against is being ignored. And that's to point out that that's the one thing the soul can't defend itself against either. See, you are the awareness, you and I, as the entity of consciousness here in form, consciousness itself in the mind of God, created through the mind of God. We are consciousness, and what we give our attention to, our focus of our consciousness toward, if you will, is what we experience through the world of form, through that, and of course through the senses of the body. All this to go back to say that over time, the powers that be manipulated the data because they wanted to stay in control. Because if you begin to understand, and I hope those who are watching us are beginning to get it, and maybe already have accepted it, what Buddha shared, 500 years earlier, was that we are reincarnating. He was able to see his past lives and shared some of those stories with his practitioners and disciples. Jesus shared the same story, that the same principle of truth, that we come here again and again to grow through time, because evolution is a God creation, and we are evolving. All of the universe is evolving, and there are periods of creation. And ultimately, there was an explosion, a manifestation of form. And God is expressing through form as a new way of knowing self, God knowing God. You and I knowing each other, like we talked about last week, through, the children that we have, as an example. More of me. And so God is intent on creating, manifesting, and experiencing more of God. More of God. So I think it's great, and the word is getting out there. I'm seeing more and more channels on YouTube, as an example, that are really beginning to openly talk about these, what were before esoteric secrets that were kept from the public. And the reason they were kept from the public wasn't so much to protect us from the secrets, but because those people would be persecuted, crucified, sounds familiar, anybody that would disagree with or become an obstacle to the power structures that were built around the marriage between religions and government. Well, in our country, our founding fathers, I have been told, were influenced, inspired by spirit in the writing of our Constitution. And part of that was to create a separation of, uh, religion and state, right? The government and religion. And we have benefited greatly from that over the millenniums, over the last few centuries for sure. But now it's time for us to see what is true. It's time for us to start to reconcile what is true and what is not true. And it's becoming public because we have the power, just like what we're doing today, of communicating with each other. Now, these aren't made up stories. These are stories that began with my favorite teacher, who is Jesus. And then Jesus said back then, I'll always be with you, and even the least among you will do more than I. Paraphrasing some of the statements he shared in the Bible that are recorded in the Bible. But a lot of what he shared with his disciples was intentionally removed. And it was done intentionally by those who were in power. Now, we don't need to spend any time denigrating what was and how it manifested. What we do need to spend time is removing the obstacles to the acceptance of the truth, if you will, because this is God creating more of God, and we are the instruments that are being utilized by that powerful source of love to be more of God here. And since God is love, the more loving we are, the better. But the interesting thing is, as we are evolving consciously, as our world, our consciousness of our race consciousness is evolving dramatically, then when people are children, if you will, are reincarnating, souls are reincarnating is what's happening, and those children are being informed by those more powerful souls, and they're starting now to share things that they're remarkable compared to what we were able to do in the past. So I am not surprised by the story as much as I'm encouraged by the story, Jason, because I think a lot more of that's coming because that's part of the second coming. No one left to crucify. We're in the midst of it. And so these are effects, if you will, of this shift of consciousness, this global shift of consciousness that's happening right now.
Oh, that's beautiful, Brother T, and something that you hinted about um, is the vibration of the planet rising. And I'm into one of your favorite books. I just started Paul Selig, I Am the Word, and I love the what I'm getting out of it. It's we are called. Everyone watching this right now is being called, and you are aware that you're being called to what you might not know yet. But when you allow spirit and you allow and request your consciousness be raised and your vibration be raised, it's really amazing. And do you mind getting into a little bit of that, Brother T? A little bit of this raising of the consciousness and raising of the vibration and allowing spirit to help us in our ascension?
Yes, I'd be glad. Yeah, I'd like to talk about that some more. I'm just listening to your language a little bit, and it kind of sticks out to me that you're saying, okay, can we allow, what can we do to allow spirit to do more? What can we do to avoid it? What can we do to prevent it? Let's go in the other direction for a moment, because you can't do anything to prevent what God is doing. You're along for the ride. I mean, it was explained to me this way, Jason. You can just consider that you're in a car or on a train, right? A passenger car on a train, and you own it. It's yours. Now, the train is going to go where the train is going to go, right? But in your passenger car, right, you can change the window dressings, you can change the furniture, you can remake the whole thing, remodel it, you can do whatever you want to. But it's going to go where it's going to go, right? Now, can I allow that train to go forward? Do I need to do something to allow the train to go forward? And can I do something to prevent it from going forward? Absolutely not. What I can do is take care of the window dressing in my boxcar. I can make what I want out of it, and I can make it a happy space, or I can make it a terrifying space. You know, one boxcar could be like a church that somebody has created for themselves, a sanctuary, and another boxcar could be hellish, because that's what that person has created for themselves, because they've allowed the default operating system, the ego, to run the game. The ego can't prevent the soul from doing what the soul is doing. It can only ignore the soul by maintaining the attention of the child of God, so that the child of God doesn't know that the soul has something to say. So the soul is like in the back seat, and the ego, the operating system, is holding onto the steering wheel, white-knuckled, and the child of God is sitting in the passenger seat, just along for the ride. But when the child of God switches its focus and its conscious and looks over its shoulder and sees, hey, the soul is right there, what's going on? And starts to communicate with the soul. So if you're not speaking to your higher self, your true self, the Holy Spirit, nothing more than your right mind, if you're not the one that starts the conversation, you're probably dialing it out. You're tuning it out. We can't allow spirit to do anything. The train is going to go where the train is going to go. God is taking us on an evolutionary journey of creating more of God, right? And we get hung up on the weather and politics and who we think is in control and the world out here and how it's going to work or it's going to be our damnation. You know, we're just on a train ride, right? And so we're looking out the window and we're seeing there's things that are passing by us, but we don't have any control of that. We have control of what's going on in our boxcar. So that's our circle of influence. That's who we are being. And when we start communicating with our soul, are you there? Yes. The soul doesn't have an agenda. It just wants to be recognized, right? And then the soul, once it's recognized and you begin to join, and I like to use the term braided, and that's one of the terms, I believe that was in Paul Selig's one of their books, of the guides. But when you become in unity, you've heard this term, right? We talk about it. There's unity organizations, New Thought unity organizations. I've been to several of them. When you are in unity with your soul, this Christ child, if you will, is not a thinking self. It's the ego that's the thinking self. So you're basically saying, get thee behind me, get in the back seat, and now I'm just going to allow my soul to drive and determine the direction, and allow my soul to be, my thinking self is going to be joined with God. My soul is the voice for God. The Holy Spirit is the voice, capital V, voice for God. And so now God's thoughts are my thoughts because I'm in unity with that channel, if you will, that where that consciousness and that love and that energy and that will can be expressed. So we kind of I'll just put it this way, I get hung up on all of the languaging, and I'm sure, very clear very often about how to express these things. That's why it's so important to be in meditation as much as we can. That's why it's so important to read and study, because this is a mind training experience, right? We are trained continuously, nonstop, 24/7 by the thoughts of fear and guilt. That's the ego construct. And when we start taking back our power and saying, I'm not listening to that, get behind me, I can witness those thoughts, but not become entrained in them. I'm not going to let that voice dictate how my cabin looks on my boxcar on this train ride. And when I'm letting my soul determine that, then my boxcar becomes a sanctuary. My home becomes a loving environment for anyone and everyone who enters. And so I become the channel ultimately, so that my soul can begin to, my mature soul, and it does have to mature over time, but if you're participating in this conversation, your soul is maturing. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening to this. And this is, if this is resonating with you, your soul is like, yes, I'm being heard, because the truth comes from God, not from the ego, and not even this child of God, because the child of God is an extension of God. The child of God, as Christ in perfect safety, when we are expressing, and our soul is who we are, and we allow our true self to be expressing in form, the world all around us begins to change dramatically, because the soul has creative power, and the ego construct, the ego self, is just making stuff up.
I love that. I love that, Brother T. And a great tool I got from the first chapters of Paul Selig is he talked about like our soul and our consciousness, and we started out today with a story of a child, and I'm going to kind of end with it, and I'll let you finish it off. But Paul Selig talks about going back to a limiting belief of your consciousness, and going back to that point of time and bringing light into that consciousness and leaving it in the past and eliminating that I'd say ceiling or something. But I'll let you leave us today with a thought of how we can become more of Christ consciousness by simply going back to a point and eliminating that limitation.
So we can't become more of Christ consciousness, because when we say we, who are we representing? The personality? Because the personality can't become Christ. The personality is just a construct. Like the sleeping self last night. You went to sleep and that little sliver of mind was dreaming all night long, creating a dreamscape of an existence. Whatever you might have dreamt, good or bad. But when you woke up, you look at it and you go, oh, it wasn't real. You can't make the sleeping self be Christ, because the Christ self doesn't sleep. And you can't cause the egoic mind to be Christ, even though it's constantly telling you, well, we'll do this. We'll get it right. I'll get it right. Who is the I that's saying that? That's not what the soul is saying to you. The soul is saying, I love you. The soul is saying, don't worry about that. Whatever's going on out there doesn't matter. We can't make the dog become a cat. It's not possible. And the personality selves that we are, until it begins to get in the back seat and and its power becomes eradicated, or certainly reduced, it's trying to do it all. It's trying to control it all. And it can't. It cannot. You, the personality self, you cannot become Christ. It's not real. It's not a real self. Only your soul ultimately will manifest, incarnate in form through the body you already have, and become Christ in form. God in form is Christ. So the thing that we can do intentionally, and in the way of mastery, Jesus talks about the keys to the kingdom. The first one is desire. So what's my desire? To awaken from a dream of illusion. Absolutely. That's my desire. And once you are on that pathway, the second key, right, is intention. So in your boxcar, if you set the intention of having a sanctuary, you set the intention of awakening to your true nature, your true self, the Holy Spirit, nothing more than your right mind, well, then you won't be watching horror films. You won't be playing, war games on virtual reality. You might be getting up and meditating for half an hour or an hour to begin your day. You might start having conversations with your soul and let your soul become you, right? And if you read these books, Paul Selig's books are wonderful. There's 12 of them now. It's been since 2009 when he channeled his first one. So that was 15 years ago, right? So in 15 years, we've gotten, wow, 80% of the journey already documented and how to get there, so to speak, because all that we're really doing is unlearning the teachings of the soul, of this ego, excuse me. So we're unlearning the teachings of the ego and accepting the truth that our soul is the mind of knowing. It's not learning anything. It's maturing. It's becoming stronger. It's becoming more of God, and eventually becomes the incarnation of God in form through us. When we get our ego out of the picture, move it into the back seat, get thee behind me. Okay? Is that helping to clarify that for you a little bit?
Yes. Thank you so much, Brother T. And everyone that's watching, you are on this journey and you are awakening. And I know you feel it. And I know that you're going to join us and be here again next week on another episode of the second.
Bye-bye.